morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 148 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have my usual co-host, Carlo Parcelli, from, what are we going to call it today? It's
Satan's Anus.
Satan's
Let's go with
Anus.
Satan's Anus. I like Satan's Anus.
Washington, D.C., in case people are curious what that means. That means Washington, D.C. Is it noon there right now, Carlo? Noon,
a little after noon, yeah.
Okay, and then I have our special guest, Greg Rosen from Chicago, Illinois. I believe it's 11 a.m. there. We are hoping that Indi stops by. Indi Samarajiva. I have it written down, and I can say it if I read it, but then I forget what it is. But Indi, he is a great author. We had him on previous. He spoke with me last night via email and said he was going to join us. So I'm not sure what happened. He might have had some emergency issues to deal with. The times might have gotten crossed somehow. He might show up any second. We don't know. But we're just going to continue on as we normally would. So we were going to talk about his great article, which I put in the description of this video, which was on national security, the question of national security. And in his article, he compares and contrasts U.S. approach to national security with China's approach to national security. In a nutshell, he makes the point that China has 5 theaters that they, that the military is responsible for. So it's North China, South China, East China, West China, and Central China. And that's what China's military is concerned with regards to national security. And he contrasts that with the United States, who has like an AFRICOM theater, an EU theater. There's a SouthCom, South American theater. It's just a global empire, and how the national security from the perspective of the United States is perverse and has morphed into basically maintaining global hegemony and doing whatever it can to just remove any kind of threat to that hegemony. So that's kind of the topic we were hoping to discuss. I think there's a lot to say on that topic. Before I launch into what I want to say, let me just kick it over to Carlo or Greg. You guys have thoughts on this topic before we really get into it?
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Let me interrupt. So, there's this new feature on StreamYard, and it's a beta feature, and it says that it's going to show comments on stage. So I want to invite any viewers, just if you type in a comment, it will show on stage with us. So you can see that Todd Doherty is wishing us a good morning. And so thank you, Todd, for watching, and good morning to you. My phone is ringing. I'm just going to ignore that, and hopefully nobody can hear it. But yeah, if you guys want to comment, it's a beta feature. If the comments get ornery, I'm going to turn the feature off. But so, Carlo, did you have something to say before I rudely interrupted you?
Well, I would begin with what we were talking about first. The thing that struck me most was that insight I've had from the beginning when Trump made the comment. I'm going to begin with Trump, and end with Mearsheimer, I hope. When Trump made the comment that when he was at the Arlington Cemetery here, that all the tombstones pointed up that the people who died in those wars were suckers, is sort of borne out by U.S. foreign policy, by the way it's conducted. Because when you think about it, Trump is from the Vietnam era, and that's my era. And if you weren't smart enough to think that the Gulf of Tonkin was a setup, that whole thing was a setup to enrich the arms dealers and to gain financial financial hegemony in that part of the world, you haven't seen what's happened to Vietnam now that it's thriving and now that it's trading open liberally with with the uh, with the U.S. government, with the U.S. corporations, international corporations. Same thing applies to Iran Contra, but more so to the first Gulf War and April Glaspie and Kuwait, and that ignored notion that the United States told Saddam Hussein that if he went into Kuwait and broadened his access to the water, the sea there, that
it would be none of our
the U.S.
business.
would not interfere.
Yeah.
Second Gulf War, Colin Powell's speech before Congress, just total horseshit. Anybody that had been paying attention on the left would have run out of covering the. I tried to parody the whole thing. There was hundreds of lies and hundreds of distortions. And
so you're saying that vial of anthrax wasn't about to kill 1 million Americans?
No, and I like yellow cake. I love yellow cake. With a little chocolate icing, and then you can go. Then you can go to now. Now you can go to Ukraine, and I'll end with the anecdote that I just told you guys. I was in casual conversation with my neighbor, and he just threw out, "Well, Russia invaded Ukraine," and I had to point out the Minsk Accords and the accords that took place in Turkey, and the fact that the Donbass was being shelled by the Azov Battalion and the other Nazis that were coming to light in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. I don't know that I convinced them, but that would all go back to taking a look at what Trump said about anybody that goes in the service is a sucker, because frankly, you're being lied to, and the lies are so obvious.
So you go ahead.
No, just pointed up what you pointed out, that that the U.S. has at least 750, 800 bases around the world, and China has one in Djibouti, and and oddly enough, the United States subleases some of that space from the Chinese in Djibouti. So the Chinese aren't even concerned about the United States having a presence in their only base in the whole world in Djibouti.
Yeah.
So it's just this Mearsheimer's position on China as being a kind of traditional security threat. I don't get it. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. The guy loses me there.
When we look at what the United States has done for the past several decades to defend its national security interests, you pointed out Vietnam, right? Across on the other side of the world, which we lost, and then Iraq twice. And now we've got this, we're pursuing our national defense in, national security interests in Ukraine by, enabling a proxy war there. But it is, what comes to mind is the United States learned from Iraq and from Vietnam especially that we're going to fight our wars by proxy, right? Because the United States, the people here aren't going to be, we're really casualty averse. And so when, U.S. servicemen start coming back in body bags, that's when people get angry. And so they know that. And so they're waging these wars by proxy. So we're going to be using, the Ukrainians as cannon fodder. And the hope is to use the Filipinos and the South Koreans and the Japanese in a coming conflict with China. But okay, so how are any of those wars really driven by national security interests? It's a crock. It's a total crock. And I mean, Iraq especially, right? Like Iraq, I mean, they tried and lied to tie Iraq to 9/11. And then they just lied with a whole bunch of other bullshit about WMD and how they're going to send autonomous drones that are just going to spray anthrax on the coast of California. And, we don't know. We got to just, like, the lies were just so preposterous and over the top in order to get this march to war going. And, the American people, as long as you're winning, like, they're going to let it happen. But, everybody sees that as a big catastrophe, 5,000 people dead. And the VA, the debt to the VA for all the Gulf War syndrome and all the lifelong things of the survivors, not just the people that died, but the survivors, like, it's a lot of money. And so they don't want to pay that. And so they prefer the ISIS forces, as our proxies in the Middle East, utilize ISIS, and the poor Ukrainians. And then the Filipinos seem like they're the next up. But Greg, we haven't let you get a word in edgewise. Overall thoughts on the difference between China and the U.S. when it comes to national security?
Looking at Indi's article, one thing that's jumped out is 80% of China's oil imports come through the Strait of Malacca, which in the event of a conflict, they assume we would block. So, we always hear about the Belt and Road as Chinese aggression, imperialism. His framing is very clearly it's a defensive lifeline for them in case of U.S. attempt to blockade them.
I think it's many things. Like the Belt and Road Initiative is many things. It definitely is a land corridor that, it's like it'll, in the event of a conflict, it'll help maintain their imports and exports if there's a naval blockade, like a sea blockade. Because the South China Sea, the vast majority of Chinese imports and exports are shipborne through the South China Sea. But also the Belt and Road Initiative, it does seem like it's an effort to, it's the new Silk Road, they call it. And really, it's going to be what brings development to the underdeveloped world. And, China's the global manufacturer, and they're manufacturing things that all these developing countries really need. And so it's like, I see it as a great beneficial humanitarian. I mean, of course it's win-win, but I mean, isn't it great that not only is China winning, but they're also developing and benefiting and improving the lives of, people in Africa, and, wherever the Belt and Road, takes effect, it's going to have a great effect on development. But yeah, I mean, I think the idea that at some point the United States is going to try and sever the import and export shipping lanes for China, like, I mean, it's obvious, and they've built these rings around China, these U.S. bases ringing China, and it's a threat. It's like a sword of Damocles hanging over China. And so, their response in part was, is the Belt and Road. But it's interesting to speculate. I can't imagine the United States is going to go to all this trouble and then not push the button on this effort. It's like you're sending all these troops into Saudi Arabia, 100,000 troops, 200,000 troops to attack Saddam. And the idea that after they all get there, you're going to negotiate some kind of peace deal and you're not going to use them, like, it doesn't seem logical. So, it seems obvious that the U.S. at some point will try and implement, a blockade, an embargo against China to contain them. And that does kind of bring us up, Mearsheimer. So my most recent post was sharing a discussion he had with Glenn Deason. And Glenn Deason was good because he got specifically towards this topic. And there's a disagreement, between these two really high profile alternative media analysts, Jeffrey Sachs and Mearsheimer. And so I appreciate both of them when they're right. I have criticisms of both of them, But on the issue of China, like I totally side with Sachs, and I think Mearsheimer is I don't know. He's just super incorrect. His whole theory of international relations. He's famous for his realist theory of international relations, and he makes the argument that the United States, as the global superpower, is will inevitably just put forth effort to contain other countries from becoming powerful to the point that they're an actual rival. And so, but not only does Mearsheimer say that this is the inevitable, and ultimately he calls it, what is his book entitled? He doesn't say it's a good thing. He
The
says
tragedy of
thank you, tragedy. So it's the tragedy of great power politics, where the global hegemon will just necessarily put forth effort to contain and to weaken and maybe destroy perceived threats to its hegemony, and he calls that a tragedy. But he kind of, I don't know, he kind of speaks a little bit out of both sides of his mouth, because when we talk about China, he says, I'm an American and this is what the United States needs to do. And so he's not just describing how the United States thinks and what the United States is going to do according to his theory. He's supporting it. And here's the last thing. Mearsheimer gets a street cred from his correct take on Russia, from his correct take on Israel, and a lot of people think he's great because he does have powerful indictments against the United States for their approach in Israel and Ukraine. And so this gives him some legitimacy, this gives him some street cred, and it really bothers me that he hammers this line against China so hard, because I just know that there's all kinds of moronic imbeciles that listen to his approach on China and think, you know what? Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe the United States does need to contain China, just like Mearsheimer said. And that really fucking pisses me off. And so that's a problem. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit more in depth.
Well, the development model, the BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative is obvious what it's doing. It's building dams. It's building bridges. It's building schools. It's building hospitals. It's not putting armies into compounds. It's not taking international oil companies and building enormous compounds for them to live in, aside from the public. It's not starting wars. Take, for example, Sudan. First of all, the United States goes in and breaks up Sudan. And now we have South Sudan. So now you have a civil war in South Sudan, and you have a civil war in Sudan proper. Well, what's that around? That has to do with Chinese efforts to help the Ethiopians finish the Grand Renaissance Dam, so that they would have electricity, that they could electrify that region of Africa to a larger degree, not just Ethiopia, but Somalia and the greater region. Now, granted, that affects the Nile, that affects the flow of the Nile, and Sudan's access to water to a large degree. But the U.S.'s answer to that is to foment civil wars, to deny not only the Chinese their victory of bringing this dam and helping electrify this large swatch of the Horn of Africa, but also they have the possibility of setting up their own foreign policy in that part of the world, and especially in Eastern Sudan, where they want to set up a new capital. So it's the U.S.'s answer is not only to dream of ways of destroying, but when something um, beneficial to a country comes to fruition, their whole thought is how could we destroy it so they don't
No,
get this
exactly.
benefit, and they're
Exactly.
under our thumb constantly.
So no, that was one. Yeah, Sudan is one, and that was definitely an effort to destroy a Chinese development initiative. And the same thing happens in Pakistan. You've got the CIA affiliated Baluchistan terrorist that is blowing up. They're using terrorist attacks, blowing up Chinese scientists and engineers who are building things like dams and stuff like that in Pakistan. And so that's really the paradigm. It's like China is trying to build and develop things and make everybody's life better. And the United States job is to destroy that and to keep that from happening. I mean, that's exactly what's going on in the world right now. And, people need to just appreciate the difference there, the difference in approach. Greg, you had something to say, I think.
Yeah. That Mersheimer interview to me was illuminating, and he explained it's not even that he sees China as a global rival, which it is, but his way of conceptualizing it was no other country except us can dominate their own region. So China can't dominate East Asia as he sees it, or Africa or anywhere else.
I try and listen very closely. I try and understand, Mearsheimer's theory and have it make sense. And ultimately, it just seems like a defense of the indefensible. Like there's no justification or, either moral or legal justification for, what Mearsheimer advocates the United States to do. And of course, he would be quick to say, well, we live in an anarchic world where there's no higher authority any nation state can appeal to. And so considerations of justice and morality simply don't exist. Like they're prioritized lower than the national security interest. And because the United States, this security competition involves maintaining their status as the unipolar hegemon, that takes precedence over any considerations of morality or justice. And it just seems like Mearsheimer embraces that. And whereas Sachs says, that's preposterous. We're humans. We can do better. We, as a planet, as a species, as a conglomeration of nation states, we can do better than what you're telling us is inevitable. And not just what you're telling us is inevitable, but what you're saying we should do.
So I don't support this argument, but I mean, Mearsheimer is the realist, right?
That's what he calls himself.
Sachs is the idealist.
Sure.
And, we have capitalism. So the goal is for capital to be able to wander freely wherever it wants over the whole planet. So
where does this realism fall? I'm going to give another example outside of China. I'm going to talk about Nicaragua. When the Sandinistas took over Nicaragua, Carter was president. They had a $300 million debt to international banking. The usual villains, and they began to pay it back. And Carter, what crossed Carter's desk was documents saying, well, the Sandinistas, they're marvelous. They're not only building hospitals and schools, but they're paying back their debt. They're paying back their debt, which they couldn't get. They couldn't get the Somozas to do in 1,000 years, because they ran off with all that money. So, I think it was the Somozas. I hope my memory is.
Yeah, no, I think it was. They were in charge.
Yeah, the Somozas, right? Yeah. And so what did the U.S. do? What did Carter do? He began formulating Iran-Contra, which Reagan then turned into a whole big thing, including the October surprise, where if there was ever an election stolen, that should be that should be foremost. That should be foremost in anybody's mind. And they pilloried the woman that brought it to light. I heard her speak at the National Press Club, and the the Washington Post, New York Times. But they knew the truth. They knew that the October surprise was the real deal. So what you get, even when you pay back your debts, even when you're a poor country, at the time they only had 5.5 million people in Nicaragua. Even if you pay back your debts, they're still going to screw you. They're not happy with that. They're not going to let go until they put the Chamorros in office, and they come and they ruin the country again.
No, they want all nation states to be governed by, puppets that they control, and people like themselves that are willing to, sell out their own people to Western corporations and to be exploitable. And if any given government refuses to do that and has their own ideas about developing their country and independence and sovereignty, well, they're going to be an enemy of the United States, of course.
Right. And we don't want them to pay back their debt. We want them to take more debt in return for conditions like they must privatize, open up, whatever to our investment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Deng Xiaoping said to grow rich is glorious. I mean, they should have got the message then. The U.S. policymakers should have got the message then. And
it's glorious for the U.S. to grow wealthy, not Nicaraguans or Chinese.
Yeah, but Deng Xiaoping meant for the Chinese to grow. Yeah, and actually, now that you look at it, the entire world. What the Chinese are doing is amazing.
Yeah, no. Let's talk about that. So one of the things that I noticed in this interview that I posted with Glenn Deason and John Mearsheimer was that they talked about China and they didn't once mention any kind of ideology such as communism or Marxism. What they always referred to China as Confucianism, Confucius China. And to me, that's it's very strange, and it's ideologically dishonest, and it's detached from reality, right? And so this is my big issue with Mearsheimer and his supposed realist school of international relations, because I don't think his realist school is related to reality, because his realist school dismisses Marxism. It dismisses oppositional class interests. It dismisses the class struggle. It doesn't. None of those things enter into his theory, his realist theory of international relations. But in reality, those things are all very important. So it's when there's a struggle between the owners of the means of production and the workers of the means of production. These two classes struggle with each other for control of the levers of power. And this matters. Like, this is what happened with the Bolshevik Revolution. The Soviet Union was led by a government that represented the workers instead of the ownership class. And that's why they had the enmity of the West, because the West continues to be, governed by the ownership class. And they are definitely interested in maintaining all the governments around the world to be ruled by the ownership class. And they don't want the threat of a good example where a government that represents the working class comes to power, does really great things, improves people's lives. I mean, that's a threat. That is a threat to the West. And so, none of this reality, this is reality. This is the fundamental reality of how things work. And none of this reality ever enters into Mearsheimer's theory. And so I accuse Mearsheimer of, having a theory that's detached from reality, despite his presumptuous label, his realist theory. Anyway, Shaniqua, thank you for joining us.
And it's a misuse of Confucianism. It's a false view of Confucianism, which is basically a system of standardized tests, of tests that people who wanted to rise in the power structure in the dynastic China used as a hallmark, a benchmark for having that kind of knowledge, that kind of discipline, and for benefiting the people. You know, that you had to demonstrate that you were benefiting the whatever whatever province you were sent to. You had to prove you were benefiting the life of the people, which is still done in China now.
Yeah.
If you go through
It's a philosophy of governance.
You're kind of describing Confucianism as an aid towards meritocracy and creating a meritocracy.
Right.
And so I'm fully on board, and definitely that has influence on the 5,000-year-old Chinese nation. But so does other realities, such as Marxism, oppositional class interest, the fact that under Mao, the working class took power in 1949 and forced the ownership class, the oligarchs, the imperialist puppets to Taiwan, which again remains a hot spot to this day and could quite possibly plunge us into war. But this is a war that Mearsheimer is advocating for. Now he's not advocating for war, and he says he thinks China can be contained without war. But he definitely is supporting the United States effort to contain China. And, so essentially, Mearsheimer is a liberal. He has totally, the Marxist reality, oppositional class interest does not enter into his thinking at all. And so what ultimately he does is he uses his theory, and it just so happens to justify exactly what the Western Empire wants to do. It's such a coincidence that his theory supports and enables and facilitates the interests of the Western Empire, and again, without any kind of legal or moral basis. It's just rank imperialism. So the last thing is, he's projecting in Mearsheimer's small mind. And that's not, I know that that's like an ad hominem to call his mind small, but I think that his mind has been totally shaped his entire 80-year existence without having contemplated alternative perspectives such as Marxism, oppositional class interest, which I believe are grounded in reality far more than his idealist fantasies about nation states and how they operate in a vacuum. It's like that's the fucking idealism. Reality is class interest. Reality is controlling the means of production, controlling political power. And so he projects onto China this same small-minded liberalness, and he says China is going to play this zero-sum game just like us, and it might as well be us, right? That's essentially what it is. China is will be just as evil, just as fucking violent and immoral and unjust as we are if we don't contain them. That's what's going to happen. And to me, being familiar with Marxism and understanding the whole point of it, understanding the rationale, like we understand that a Marxist global hegemon will be infinitely superior to a capitalist global hegemon. And so for this fucking moron to project our own ignorance onto an enlightened society kind of pisses me off. But I know I'm kind of talking to Joe, because I know Joe he put a long response to my post on this interview between Deason and Mearsheimer, and I haven't had time to respond in full, but no, he had a lot of points to make, and so in my mind I'm kind of speaking to him a little bit. But I don't know what he's saying here. Please reconcile the quasi-capitalism of the PRC and the fact that means of production is to a great extent nearly entirely controlled by the committee and not democratically at the point of production. Okay, so, and this gets us back to this article about not this article, but this debate about what is Marxism, what is socialism, what is communism. And so I think to a lot of liberals, you have a total wrong misconception about what these terms mean. And I can use all three terms interchangeably, and it's basically, it's the struggle against oligarchy. It's the struggle against, the ownership class dominating the levers of political and economic power. So that's what socialism is. And, me and Greg, we go back and forth about, because socialism can also be defined as a mode of production. So socialism, on the one hand, is a struggle against ownership class control over the political economy, but it's also, so it's the struggle for the working class to control the political economy. But it's also a mode of production, right, where the industries are owned by the workers themselves. Industries are owned by the workers. You don't have private ownership of industries, and the workers decide on things like wages and what to produce and how much to produce, where to sell it, etc. So I think, I think we can expand our understanding of socialism. And I think if you expand your understanding of socialism, things make a lot more sense. And so Deng had some reforms. Deng said, hey, you know what? Let's harness capitalism as far as the capitalist mode of production. We will maintain worker control over the political economy by, in the hands of this Chinese Communist Party. But we're going to allow individual owners to get extremely wealthy from their ownership of various industries. Sure, the state will control the main industries, but we're going to allow capitalism. And by allowing some capitalism, a measure of capitalism, everybody is going to benefit. Costs, living standards and quality of life will increase on a much faster trajectory than if we don't do this. So Mao understood that in 1945, and Deng was able to implement that, and we see it continues under Xi. But to me, it's not anti-Marxism to tolerate a measure of capitalism in order to improve living standards, increase the productive forces, etc. Now it's risky because you're always at risk of a capitalist cabal getting powerful and taking over the system. But as long as it's being managed by a communist party in the interests of the people, that's the best way. And there's all kinds of strategies that the Communist Party can employ to best and most efficiently facilitate and further the interests of the working class. But it's a broad topic.
Let me jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is by definition anti-Marxist. Just Marx's theory is very clear. Socialism means getting rid of capitalism and private ownership of the means of production. I think you can say Marx's theories were based on his prediction of socialism in advanced capitalist countries, so there was already a development of the means of production. So the theory's been modified in China and Russia and places where there's been lack of development. So, but it is not Marxism to do this. I mean, I think we should say. I mean, it's defensible, and it's a strategy to deal with a real problem that Marx didn't anticipate in his theory. So I'd look at it.
Well, okay. I mean,
just one other to comment
on
Joe's comment about democracy. Once you have, in Marx's theory, once you have capitalists loose in a society, you can't really have open democracy because they will wind up buying it, taking it over, and eliminating what's left of the socialism. So China has to maintain a pretty tight lid politically.
Okay,
Right now.
So a good 2 points. I definitely agree with your second one. I'm not willing to limit my definition of Marxism to you know, and I can see Marxism. I mean, I can agree that it's the effort to, you know, arrive at a socialist mode of production, but I think there's different tactics, right? And so to do that, I think you can utilize tactics such as harnessing the, because I don't see Marx isn't dogmatic, right? Now it has an objective, and
He is
then
in this. I mean, he says very clearly socialism occurs when the means of production are publicly owned.
yeah, no, that
Marx
is a
himself is.
definition. That is a
Yeah.
narrow definition of socialism. If it's just, you know,
But it's
worker
his
control.
Marxism.
What's that?
I mean, that's Marx. We're talking about the author of Marxism. So
Yeah, no, that's one. But how do you get there? That's the question. And so Marx didn't detail a blueprint on how to get there. And so, are we engaging in Marxism when our effort is to get there? And then on our effort to get there, which is the Marxist effort, what tactics can we employ? And to say that this tactic is un-Marxist, like that's what I reject. Like I say,
well, I don't know if it's Marxist or not, but it's not socialism according to him. If you have everything socialized like China did, and then you start privatizing, you've broken your socialism, per Marx.
well, you know, are we talking on a national level or on a global level?
National.
Okay, well, I don't think Marx did that, right? Marx wasn't talking on a national level. Marx was talking on a global
He
level. He's like,
was.
we need socialism.
No, he was talking national level. He talked about revolutions he predicted in Britain, Germany, primarily, France. You know, he talked about nations.
I mean, I'm not saying Marx didn't talk about nations, but what is socialism? Socialism is the end goal of socialism is a global system, right? Is capitalist a global system or a national system?
Ideally, but I mean, he didn't say don't
No, as
work
a
on
question,
socialism
Art,
if there's
Greg,
capitalism out there.
is capitalism a global system or a national system?
Either and both.
It's a okay. I mean, it's a global system, and Marxism. The goal of Marxism is to have a global system of socialism. And so, what I'm saying is, there's not a such thing as un-Marxist tactics. I'll tell you what. The tactics that are successful in achieving global socialism, those are the most Marxist. The tactics that are unsuccessful, those are the least Marxist. So that's my definition, right? So whatever succeeds, whatever tactics are going to be the most effective and most successful in achieving global socialism, those are the most Marxist tactics anyone can use. And again, Marx isn't a dogma. It's not dogmatic. It doesn't say you will do things like this. If you don't do things like this, you are not Marxist. Like that is I'm going to reject that thinking, that way of thinking. But anyway, we could agree to disagree.
I'm not, disagreeing with China's course per se, but just what Marx said is worth noting.
Well, I'm not.
I don't think he said he didn't say socialism is global revolution and global displacement of capitalism. He said it's within your country taking over the means of production. I mean, Trotsky said without world revolution, it's useless. I mean, that was his argument in big debate with Stalin.
So,
right,
but
who
no,
said, well, we're going to build it here.
So, but the thing is, my point is the point of Marxism is to have a global socialist system. It's not to have one national socialist system, right? That's what I'm saying.
I don't read that in Marx per se. That's
Really?
ideal, but I don't read that in Marx.
So
I see
Marx
that in Trotsky. I see that in everybody's understanding that it's easier if there's a global socialist system as opposed to capitalists around trying to destroy it.
Giving these two options, which one do you think Marx was advocating for? A single nationalist socialism or a global socialism? Like, I mean,
both,
it just
but
seems
you start
obvious.
in the nation.
Huh?
Both, but you start in the nation.
Okay, but that doesn't contradict. I don't disagree with that. That doesn't contradict anything I'm saying either.
Well,
Right.
So yeah, we started the nation, and we hopefully continue starting in the nations and as many nations as possible until we have a global system. Like that's ultimately what's going on.
well,
And again, if one nation's tactic is to do what China did, that is the most Marxist thing you can do because it's successful, and it's been the most thing successfully displacing global capitalism and creating the conditions that would allow global socialism. So in that way, China's is the most Marxist. Their tactics are the most Marxist, and that's just, I mean, that's how I see things. We can see things differently, but I'm not gonna agree that it was un-Marxist. Like I'm not gonna, because it just begs the definition of what is Marxist, and what is Marxist are those tactics that are going to most efficiently and effectively result in a global socialist. Like we have global capitalism now, we're going to replace that system with a global socialism. Carlo, you're trying to get in a little bit.
well, yeah, I'm gonna change the subject a little bit. I mean, first of all, didn't Marx and a number of other theorists think that the revolution would take place in a poorer, more rural country than this what became the Soviet Union? I mean, wasn't there that it didn't it wasn't going to take place? I mean, excuse me, I got it flipped. I flipped it. Didn't they think it was going to take place in an industrialized country like Germany, not a poor country, a more agrarian country like the Soviet Union?
Yeah, and I think Marx understood in his later writings that that was true. And I think at one point he did think it was the fact that they were industrialized that was going to result in the revolution, because they were, had the means, mode, and opportunity within the industries to successfully revolt. And so I think, at one point he thought the revolution was going to happen in the most advanced countries, whereas in reality it was the opposite, because the capitalists were able to provide just enough, bread and circuses to keep people from being revolutionary in the advanced countries. And they were very good at that. And I don't think Marx quite appreciated how successful the capitalists would be at giving people just enough to keep them from being able to, feeling revolutionary. But in Cuba, in Russia, in China, in those countries that had very, very little to lose, that is where we have seen the successful revolutions. And I think Marx might have appreciated that more later, but at one point he definitely thought the opposite.
Yeah. And just to change the subject a little bit, it's I don't know if schools still have it, but they used to have something called civics. They used to have civics lessons in America and in our schools. And to me, the argument, what the Chinese have in a very high degree through Confucianism is a lesson in physics. And this it speaks volumes to the national personality of people. If you want a great example of that, Ezra Pound, the tremendous fascist poet, translated a Li Bo poem loosely, Rahaku in Japanese, called "The Exile's Letter." Read "The Exile's Letter" if you get a chance. The Pound translation, I highly recommend, because it's a great translation. And you'll see what I mean by that psyche among people who are serving the greater population. And I think that is imbued. There's an expectation and among the people not only controlling the economic situation and the people benefited by it. And you have to admit the Chinese people are benefiting by the PRC right now. That there's a bomb there that doesn't exist.
No, and
in much of the world, it certainly doesn't exist in the U.S., where it's bullshit. If you said that to to any of these capitalists here, think or that South African ninny Musk, they'd laugh your ass off if you talk about a bond between the people
Yeah.
and the people ruling them.
No,
And
that
that
bond
bond
is
exists.
actively
Let me
subverted,
finish.
and
And it spills over. It's all the development that the Chinese are bringing to people around the world. If recently Niger threw three Chinese corporations out of their country because they felt that they weren't living up to their contracts. The Chinese dealt with those people. They're not going back. They're not going to reopen the contracts they had because they weren't dealing fairly. If they're not if they're not careful, they'll end up with the people in China who sold the Chinese tainted milk. They'll take them out into a field and they'll put a bullet in the back of their head. That's the Chinese ethos. That's how much they care about the straight and narrow. The unwobbling pivot. It's all in Confucius, and the Chinese culture, including what I see the PRC doing, is and doing developmentally, not only in China but around the world, is imbued with that sense of ethics, that sense of helping people. Now I know it can be rocked. If you're like an engineer, a Chinese engineer, and you're sent to Ghana or something to work on a project, it can change you. Obviously the people around you are going to change you, and you're going to see a different ethoses, a different ethos in effect. But by and large, you're never going to lose that sense of ethics. The Kuomintang, they had no ethics. The nationalists, they go into Formosa, they murdered 30,000 people right away. That was their ethics. So those people do exist in China, but by and large, now it's in control, as far as I can see, of people a lot like Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso. He seems like the real deal. If he turns out not to be the real deal, I'm going to be one of the most disappointed people on the planet, because here's a guy who seems to be imbued with that ethos in a way that is almost unheard of nowadays. It would in the capitalist world, it's ridiculed. That's the difference. That's the huge difference between the Chinese and the and what they're doing, and the West and what it's doing. I'm sorry. Thought I'd get that out.
In my conceptual ideological framework, all you're doing is describing the difference between a government, that represents the working class, and a government that represents the ownership class. And of course, the ownership class, I call that an oligarchy, or a plutocracy, or a dictatorship of capital, or a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Like, they're not interested in, furthering the interests of the masses, and they're opposed to democracy because they understand that, the masses outnumber them, and the masses have interests that are different from their own. And so that's what we call the class struggle. And that's why, we've had all these revolutions in Cuba to overthrow the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie and implement a government that represents the working class. Cuba, Russia, China, Vietnam. So a lot of places, but that's what I hear you describing.
But they, it's called the working class. What do they want to do? They want to fucking work. Let them work. Give them a context to work in. That's what the PRC is doing. Jesus Christ. Yeah. Is that so hard to absorb? They're doing it better than anybody else on the planet. What do you want to do? What do you want to go back to Kang Chek and his wife, or Ziem and his wife's 100 white horses and all that crap?
Greg,
Vietnam now has a population of over 100 million people. Back in my day, it was like 37 million. People that fuck that much are happy people. They like what's going on.
Greg,
Jesus Christ.
can you respond to Joe? I want to hear what you have to say, and then I'll try and take a shot at it.
Sure. Good. That's a great question, right?
Yeah.
Billy and me have talked a little bit about this off the show. I think in a lot of ways they may have achieved the goals of their reform and opening up. They have now fully developed their productive capacity, which is the stated goal, right? They no longer have socialized poverty, as Deng said. Not only have they reached the top of the value chain, they're starting to deindustrialize and develop some late capitalism problems like alienation and gig work. So, I mean, I think it's possible this is a lot of what's going on with Xi, bringing back Marxism and the anti-corruption drive, both of which would be necessary to start moving past this current stage, although they haven't said they're doing that.
Yeah. So again, like to me, there's the goal of Marxism is to create a global socialist paradigm. And right now we have a global capitalist paradigm. And right now the global capitalist paradigm is very strong. And we're seeing that as strong as they are, they feel that they're under threat, right? They're under threat from being displaced by China, and all around the world, in Iran and Russia. And so you have this very powerful global capitalist power. And, again, the goal is to replace that global capitalist power. And so, I don't think we can talk about, we can. It gets us back to I don't want to, weigh in on the side of Trotsky against Stalin in the socialism in one country debate. But, if, material conditions in the Soviet Union after World War II and before World War II were entirely different than the material conditions we have now. And it's the material conditions that dictate our tactics and our strategy. And so given that we have, the material conditions of today, we have to have a strategy for achieving the displacement of global capital. And again, I see China as being very successful in doing that. And guess who also agrees with me that China is being very successful at displacing global capitalism? It's the Western capitalists, right? They're seeing what's going on. They're identifying China as the threat. They're in the process of a pivot to China, and they're, eventually going to do what they can militarily, I think, to destroy China's economy and, maintain the preeminence of their Western global capitalist system throughout the rest of the 21st century. That's what is going on. That's the ball game. Every other consideration takes is below this on what, as far as what's important. The list of priorities, nothing else, reaches that level of priority. So, of course, global socialism is the ultimate objective, but to demand that China, start giving us a sign right now, while we're in the midst, at the very beginning, really, of this struggle where we're going to displace global capital, replace it with global socialism, to demand that China right now prove their socialist bona fides by abolishing all private ownership of the means of production. What are you, what the fuck? What kind of a question is that? It demonstrates a total ignorance regarding what the fuck is going on. So, that's not going to benefit China at all. That's not going to benefit socialism at all if China right now proves how fucking socialist they really are. Or we're real socialists. We're gonna just for no good reason except to prove to Western liberals that we're really socialists. We're gonna abolish private ownership of the means of production. So again, private ownership.
Well, there's reasons to do that besides appeasing the West, right?
Okay. I mean, I'm make your what's your point?
Well, I
Make
mean,
your point.
they've accepted a lot of income inequality and people that are living poorly that wouldn't need to be because they're having a profit extracted out of them. And I mean, I would argue that as the US gets more hostile and unwelcoming of China in the world capitalist system, at some point they have to ask, why is it most efficient to have a large part of the value going into the pockets of capitalists as profit instead of to the state or to the public? You know, it's a lot
Well,
of leaking of resources. That's why, you
yeah.
know,
Well, what I was gonna say, before I wanted to hear your objection, I mean, my point was, capitalism doesn't really exist in China like it does in the United States, right? So there are, the Chinese Communist Party has allowed various people to get wealthy from their ownership of industries and from the exploitation of labor. But again, the Communist Party is the political hegemon, and they can snap their fingers and undo that. So in a very real sense, the capitalists do not own the means of production. They're like, they're temporarily leasing it from the people, but at any second, and so that's a different paradigm. It's not real capitalism. In the West, it's real capitalism where the capitalists own the government and the industries, and they have total control. It's
I mean, I think
different than
it's
that in
just as
China,
real.
and
It's
so
just under
and
a
so
different political system.
it comes down to a matter of tactics, right? Is it going to benefit the Chinese Communist Party and the objectives of socialism to abolish and to snap their fingers and socialize all of their industries? And I don't see how right now doing that. I mean, I haven't seen anybody make a compelling argument how that's going to help us achieve global socialism. What needs to happen right now is that China needs to continue to maintain their strength, right? And their strength is through their economic strength is from being the world's manufacturer, and having good relationships with the rest of the planet, and displacing the power of Western imperialism. And we can see that taking place. And so you've seen the meme, right? Do nothing and win. I think that makes sense. And I don't see why China needs to do this this sudden shift in that's a real big change in tactics that I can't make any sense over. And I haven't seen an argument why they should do that. But I mean, I hear
Their
what you're saying.
strategy under G is to spread the prosperity or something like that, which implies starting to socialize the wealth.
Right. Well, again, I mean, the Communist Party of China, CPC, Communist Party of China, again, has total control. And they do have, I think, even the privately owned industries, like there's party monitors, and they make sure even the privately owned industries like Huawei, the owner of Huawei has said, and he's a former soldier in the PLA, People's Liberation Army, and I mean, he said straight up, you could read it on his Wikipedia page, that when the interests of the people, namely the Communist Party, and the interests of his corporation are in conflict, he's going to do what's in the best interest of the people. And I mean, that's just a different kind of thing than what we have in the United States. And I don't think that, calls for, and the liberals, like they're always like, oh, China's never going to wither away. Their state's never going to wither. Well, the fuck they aren't. Like, I mean, that's the fucking plan, but as a sequencing of plans, and you can't just wither away when you've got the Western Empire on your borders. Like what the fuck is wrong with you?
Right.
You're dumb. I'm sorry. I'm being belligerent. Okay, no, so Joe says, do you not see the conundrum of Western capital being antagonistic toward Eastern capitalism, socialist capitalism? A conundrum. I mean, Yeah, I get it. Like, I mean, the West is trying to destroy China. China is a rival to Western global hegemony. And so I don't know if that's a conundrum. I mean, that's just kind of the
Right.
reality. I don't know what he means by conundrum. But this is fun, Greg. I'm sorry that Indi wasn't able to join us. I'd like to hear his 2 cents. But I'm not sure what happened, but I'm sure he'll make it up to us one of these days. Next week, we might have a break all of next week, but after that, I plan on going back normally. But we're not done. We're only at an hour and 6 minutes, and I'm having a good time. But and I can be loud, and I can not let people, get their point across, and I don't want to do that. So. Is there anything that you want to object to that I've said? Okay, so Joe's going to talk about capitalism versus capitalism. And again, I'm saying there's 2 different things. Like what's going on in China is not the same thing as what's going on in the United States.
No.
Like those things are not equal. So the conundrum is socialism versus capitalism. And it's, socialism with Chinese characteristics versus capitalism. That's what's going on. And I mean, I couldn't explain that any clearer than I have. And so if you can reject my explanation, that's fine. But go ahead, Carla.
I just want to say that when China goes into another country to help with the development project, they don't put all kinds of strings on that country. You don't have to join Africa or one of these. Yeah, I mean it's not.
You don't lean on them
different.
to.
It has nothing to do with Western capitalism. Not even a vague shadow of what Western capitalism. Look at the irony of this. You have Venezuela, right? The West hates Venezuela. It's not a communist country. Maduro's gone out of his way, as Chavez did, to avoid shutting down the press that slanders him every day, tells lies after lies over the Venezuelan broadcasting system. At the private ownership, it's still. I think it's still 60 or 65% in the hands of private ownership.
Yeah,
it's in no way. Then you have Ukraine, which has gotten rid of every alternative radio station. Well, has nobody, unless you think Poroshenko is a viable candidate to run against this criminal.
They're assassinating them. They're assassinating prospective politicians in Europe.
And Ukraine, according to Western capitalism, is the democratic country. Give me a break. There's no comparison. Give me a break.
Yeah.
So to go back to
yes, Greg.
Venezuela brings up something China's doing right. They have a proper dictatorship of the proletariat, right? I mean, that's what Venezuela won't do, which is keeping them from developing. Their bourgeoisie is running wild still.
Yeah. I mean, by certain metrics, the Nordic countries are less capitalist than Venezuela, by certain measures. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of capitalism going on in Venezuela. And they've gone out of their way not to be heavy-handed, not to repress the press, not to, and you can argue the tactics. You could say Venezuela maybe should do more. They definitely have the military, and I think that's what they need. And we saw what happened in Bolivia when Morales did not have control of his military. They were able to undermine him using the military. So you really have to control the military. Assad thought he had the military, and we saw what happened there. But yeah, it's a question of tactics, and the tactics are determined by the material conditions. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And we can argue, we can have our opinions, we can say you should do it like this, you should do it like this. But ultimately, we don't know what is being understood and seen, at the level of the highest, point of the Venezuelan government, the Chinese government. Like, we don't know what they're dealing with. We can definitely complain about, this policy or that policy. And we could be right too, but it's, at a certain point, you just kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't want to say you have to trust, but no, you trust and the fruits, you know, by the fruits. And what are the fruits that China has accomplished? Tremendous, unprecedented skyrocketing of all quality of life metrics, an ending of poverty. It's like, you know, that's the proof. You don't need to trust. You can just look at the results. And so, you know, to argue that, oh, they could have had even better results if they would have done this or that, like, shut the fuck up. That's the most unprecedented increase in quality of life, most efficient in the history of the known universe. And you want to, oh, it could have been better if they would have, shut the fuck up. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm sounding like Carlo. Carlo's a good mentor. He's been a great mentor. Greg, but I'm not talking to you. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying you're making the arguments that I'm attacking. So don't, but there's definitely, no, I liberals, you know, the liberals, the anti-China liberals who are just shocked that I would like support China as a socialist country. It's those people that I really get frustrated with, because they have no understanding, at least of what I deem to be the proper realist conception of what is going on and why things are like they are. You know, they're caught in this liberal idealism that is entirely detached from objective reality, which, of course, the fundamental reality, the most important aspect of reality, the most impactful, the most influential on everything is the class struggle, and it's the difference in interest between the masses and the ownership class, the working class mass and the ownership class. And unless you understand that and understand how that struggle has manifested itself in China, in Venezuela, in Cuba, and in the West, then you don't know what you're talking about. You're just totally detached from objective reality. But I'm kind of repeating myself. Carlo, please.
Just another example. I mean, China has 1.4 billion people, and they have a 5-year plan. And the 5-year plans are generally successful. Obviously, they're successful overall. Here, we got some fat orange prick who you know, I know 4-year-olds that have more facts in their head than Trump does, and he can't come up with a tariff one day to the next, and then his excuse is, oh well, I'm playing five level chess. Where? Up your ass, you stupid jackass. Look at that you want to talk about a remedy for success? The remedy for success in the West is in the hands of the multinational major corporations. Those are the people that control everything. And in China, the success of China lies with the Central Committee. And I would take the Central Committee being successful over helping the general population being successful, more successful than anybody ruling in the West. Any way you want to set it up. I can't think of anybody other than, you know, of course, the heavily sanctioned, the ones where the Western banking community has their foot on their neck, like Cuba, for example.
Yeah.
Or Nicaragua.
Well, their accomplishments vindicate them, right? I mean, what they have been able to accomplish is the proof that of their interests, what they're interested in doing. It's an interesting discussion about planning the 5-year plan. So those liberals that accuse China of being capitalist, like, please, you want to call that capitalism? Let's just get some capitalism here then. Let's nationalize our banks. You know, let's have the 5 biggest banks in the world state-owned. Let's have 5-year economic plans that are predicated on achieving certain social outcomes, like ending poverty, raising wages, raising living standards. And then let's even have our private industries subordinate to these economic plans. So the private industries have to behave in a way that it facilitates these 5-year economic plans predicated on achieving certain social goods. Like if that's what you call capitalism, fine. Let's make us capitalists here in the United States. Let's do the same thing. But in the West, they just talk out both sides of their mouth, and they try and give an ideological cover to their rampant imperialist policies that are predicated on just achieving their own limited, narrow interests. But to do that, they denounce this idea of planning, and they tell everyone, and a lot of libertarians believe that, if you try and plan your economy, you're going to end up with hunger and starvation and gulags and repression and famine. If that's what planning gets you. And so they really think that planning is bad. And then they really have a conundrum. Then they've moved themselves into an ideological corner, because now they have a problem, because if they're going to figure out how to defeat the planners, they better come up with a plan, right? But I thought plans were bad. So they're going to have, and they do plan, they plan around their own interests, and then they lie to everybody and say, oh, planning's bad, we don't plan, because they don't want the responsibility of benefiting people's lives. They don't want the responsibility of, lifting up and improving the quality of life for the vast majority of workers. That's a big burden to them. They don't want to deal with it. Go ahead, Carlo. You got to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to go.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you the week after next.
I will keep trying to join you. As long as my doctors don't keep sending me back to the hospital, I will try to keep joining you guys.
All right, Carlo. Thank you.
Good to see you, Carlo.
Bye. Take care, guys.
It's just the two of us now, Greg. What do you think about our disagreement? Have you are we agreeing to disagree? Have I persuaded you? Do you just think it's not worth it because I'm too minded?
Well, where do you want to go with it? I'm happy to discuss it.
I'm not sure. Well, the last thing I'm saying, I thought it was interesting. Last time Indi was on, we talked about, planning and how the West's rhetoric around planning is just nonsensical, kind of. But Carlo brought up the fact that China, engages in extensive planning. Man, China, let me tell you about China's planning. It's like they have all these pilot programs everywhere. They're doing pilot programs. Is this going to work? Is this going to work? Let's give this a try. Let's try this. And based on these different things, they've really had some great policies that were able to, deal with a lot of problems. For instance, there's never been slums in China. There's no such thing as shanty towns and slums like in Brazil, like in these developing countries that are slowly developing towards industrialization and technological advancement, right? So China from scratch built over 200 cities. Like 20 of these cities, house over 1 million people. It's just amazing the kinds of planning. Now, the West saw China's planning and would laugh at them, and they had this whole entire story about ghost cities and about how China is so stupid and inefficient, and they're creating these ghost cities that nobody lives in, and it's just like, what the hell is the crazy communists doing? But what they were doing was fucking phenomenal. And they managed to, quicker than any other country in the history of the known universe, go from the poorest country on earth to the richest country on earth without fucking slums, because they built. Go ahead.
So, I don't have any of the liberal criticism, as you know.
I know.
But, when we're talking about what's the most ideal, what comes to my mind is Stalin's USSR. Right? Everything was socialized, and I think they rebuilt the Soviet Union, but basically by 1950, which is incredible. Housing, hundreds of thousands of people, rebuilding hundreds, thousands of villages, towns. good chunk of the industrial complex.
Yeah. No, Stalin, the Soviet Union definitely deserve a lot of credit for what they accomplished. And they were, they had their own material conditions that they were dealing with. And the biggest material condition that was facing the Soviet Union was the threat of, fascist invasion. And so they knew they didn't have long. And so, okay, it's very similar. So, the West invented these stories to scare people and to spin the positive things that China was doing with regards to building these cities and planning these cities and building them, and then having everybody move in so that slums weren't created. So they invented this whole narrative of ghost towns. They did the same thing with Stalin. While Stalin was industrializing and updating and modernizing the agricultural sector, they accused him of what? Causing a famine deliberately.
Deliberate famines.
Causing a famine. And so it's just, and that's kind of the whole point, right? Because, you see these governments sincerely trying to do things to benefit the people. And so it's a threat to you because you don't want to do any of that shit. You want the status quo to remain where the government works for the benefit of the ownership class, and that's it. And you don't want to get caught up in having to make these fucking miserable workers happy. Like, that's not your problem. So, and if somebody else tries to do that, you want to denounce them and denounce that entire ideology as much as you can, because it's ultimately threatening to you. But and that's just kind of what we see. So no, what he accomplished was tremendous. And I mean, the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and they were dealing with different material conditions than China was. And I think Stalin made all the right decisions. Like, I mean, he had to industrialize, and he did very quickly. Now, I would say that, okay, this guy, I really liked what he said. He was on India Global Left. I'd never heard of this guy before. He was some professor. But he made the case that what China is doing now is more Marxist and more socialist, more in line with Marx than what the Soviets did. But he said, but no, the Soviets were absolutely right to do what they did because they were on a timeline. Like they had a 10-year time frame that they had to get things done. But and so his argument was, and I'm paraphrasing because it's a vague recollection, but he was quoting the Communist Manifesto that says, you will wrest by degree the bourgeois capital. So and so that's what China's doing. It's like by degree, and whereas the Soviet Union just did it all at once, right? It wasn't by degree. That's and there was more to it, and I should really.
Well, like we talked about, they did actually a rapid version of what China's done. They socialized everything, and then at the end of the Civil War, they put back capitalism for 7 years.
The new economic project,
right? And did what China's supposedly doing, rebuilt the.
And then Hitler got elected, or not elected. Hitler was appointed by the Western powers. Yeah, surprise, surprise.
No, it was 28. They switched it before Hitler. They decided they had met the goal, and
they got rid of the NEP in 28.
Yeah, they didn't like the effect of having capitalists in their society again. Which is, to me, the big question, and what China has had to spend a lot of energy neutralizing and trying to manage, is once the capitalists are loose, they're going to try to corrupt the government and do a lot of the things that we don't like that are here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was multiple experiments, but the Soviet Union was never not under attack from the capitalists, right? Both without and within. So they were always under sanction and embargo. And so they really needed to engage in a policy of self-sufficiency and total control. And that same thing is true of China, from 1949 until when the embargo was ended. because they simply didn't have the opportunity to, to engage in trade and to develop the productive forces with the help of, international capital, and, trading with the other nations. And so that opportunity was never afforded to the Soviet Union. It was offered to China in 1971. And of course, I think they were correct to shift tactics and to take advantage of those opportunities. And again, that one guy does argue that, that's the most Marxist approach, is the approach that, most efficiently raises living standards and brings strength and prosperity to your economy. And I mean, because what is the end goal? The end goal is a global socialist society system. And to get there, you've got to overcome the existing global capitalist system. And you're not going to be able to get there and defeat that global capitalist system if you're weak, impoverished, and your people are unhappy. And that makes your government weak. And so no matter what your government intentions are, you're not going to have any success towards that larger goal of the global socialist system if your people are unhappy, and you're very easy to get taken out in a color revolution, right? And that's what the West excels at. So again, I definitely think that China's approach and their change of tactics to embrace these new opportunities that came about due to the Sino-Soviet split and the Kissinger and Nixon agreeing to end the embargo and recognize the CPC as legitimate government of China. Like, all of that was the Marxist thing to do, because it was the most effective strategy in achieving the displacement of global capital, which we see going on now. But it's just such interesting times that we're in right now. I think huge things are going to happen before Trump's term is over. I mean, they're going to definitely try and get Trump to initiate some major policies that are really going to shake up the planet. And they're going to want Trump to do it because they want to blame Trump, for all the negative fallout, all the negative externalities that occur. They want to be able to just blame Trump for it. And so the question is the narcissist Trump going to fall for it and be their fall guy, or is he going to resist? And then if he does resist doing something catastrophic that they want him to do, are they just going to get him out of the way somehow? Anyway, I love speculating. I'm so happy that we were able to have this discussion. But do you have a follow-up, Greg, or anything else?
Just in terms of circumstances and history, the 70s had the Soviet-Sino split going on, which was a unique historical moment. And, arguably something socialist states don't get to have is where the biggest capitalist superpower is recruiting them.
Sure.
Like we were doing China.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. And of course, it's awful that Khrushchev, decided to just lie and try and ingratiate himself with the West by slandering Stalin and really causing the ideological split between China and the Soviet Union. And it's a lesson, like, we got to learn from it. And I think Putin and fortunately Xi are smart enough to have learned from that lesson that, it's like, what was it? Planet of the Apes, apes together strong. It's like they understand that their future is gonna be bright if they can not get divided by the West. And I think that's obvious. I think they know that better than we do. But the material condition is very unusual that the capitalists are going to try and recruit, one side. And again, they're lamenting that they're lamenting that decision. And we're going to see them reinstitute. I think they're going to try and reinstitute this global embargo of China. They're going to try, but they're struggling, right? Because they're realizing that all these other countries aren't as ideologically predisposed to maintaining Western imperialism as they should be. And so we're going to find out.
Dependent on China on top of it.
Yes. No, yeah. And again, China was absolutely smart to make themselves economically impregnable by, intertwining themselves in the global economy. Like they are inextricably linked, and they're the major core. They're the hub of the global economy. They're the world's manufacturing center. And so they were really smart to do that. And they've got a winning hand. And like we were saying earlier, just they got to do nothing and they'll win. But yeah, we'll see what the West's strategy is. Just like I am so interested in seeing what the hell their plans are, because they don't have any cards to play. Like they don't have anything. They don't have a winning hand. They're just going to lose. And so the question is, how is that loss going to come about? What is it going to look like? Man, they seem really floundering right now. Trump is hapless. He's trying these sanctioned bullshit that's not doing anything. He wants the Federal Reserve to lower their interest rates, and that would be nice for me so I can refinance my home. But it doesn't look like Powell wants to do that. And they don't have their shit together. The ruling class, they're divided, and again, they don't have any hand to play anyway. There's not a winning strategy, or they would be united around that winning strategy. And so, there's only defeat in their future, and that's making them even more. It's gonna just make the collapse happen even more quickly. But I think Indi would agree with that if he was here with us. He's like, the West is a paper tiger. They're so weak. There's nothing they can do. And I'm a little bit worried about, the amount of, the damage they can cause to the global economy, the damage they can cause to, the working class around the world with wars, with embargoes and energy prices skyrocketing, and maybe, the use of nuclear weapons. Like, these are all things I worry about, in this, while we're observing imperial decline. But you see how I popped the name of our program in at the very last minute. Okay, Greg, thank you so much. I will end the stream, and we will pick up probably in a week's time. So we'll see you then. Thank you.